I was halfway through debugging a logic tree that only 3 people on Earth understood when I got the calendar invite. HR meeting mandatory attendance immediate. No subject line. No warning. Just one of those sterile little pings that carries the weight of a guillotine. I stared at it for a second, hands still hovering over the keyboard, before locking my screen and walking to the 5th floor. HR always smelled like cold coffee and freshly printed disappointment. When I walked in, Chase Ellison, our freshly minted CEO, all cheekbones and charisma, was already seated at the glossy conference table like he was posing for a magazine cover called Corporate Injustice Monthly. 2 HR reps flanked him like fainting goats. One of them smiled like she was about to euthanize a golden retriever. "Amanda," Chase began, holding his hands like he was auditioning for Jesus in a community theater production. "This isn't easy." Which, of course, meant it would be excruciating for me. But in light of the acquisition and our efforts to streamline costs, we're reevaluating core roles. I just blinked. "You've been incredibly valuable," he continued, "but your current role overlaps with several new strategic initiatives. So, effective immediately, your salary will be adjusted by 30%. This isn't a reflection of your performance. We just need to be leaner. Translation: you're expensive, middle-aged, and in the way." No mention of the fact that I'd been at Stratavolve for 16 years, longer than the damn office chairs. No nod to the fact that I had architected the very product Echelon Core that their shiny new acquisition deal was built on. I wasn't just a cog in the machine. I built the machine. And now, it was being treated like an expired printer cartridge. Also, real quick, since you're here and probably stewing with righteous rage, 93% of you listening haven't subscribed. It's free. It helps more than you think. And if you're enjoying this unraveling train wreck of corporate genius, hit that like button too. Our team eats caffeine and spite, and every click keeps us fueled. Anyway, I signed the adjustment paperwork without a word. Didn't ask questions, argue. I just looked at Chase, dead in the eyes, and smiled. The kind of smile you give to someone who thinks they've won a game you invented. Then I turned, walked out, and headed back to my desk. That same afternoon, the company Slack channel blew up with welcome messages for Brandon Hale, the new VP of Technical Architecture. Brandon was 29, wore loafers with no socks, and introduced himself in the all-hands meeting as a disruptor of legacy systems, referred to Echelon Core as an elegant old car we're gonna hot rod. I could barely hear him over the sound of my soul throwing up. They gave him my office. 2 days later, my badge access to the deployment servers was revoked for security restructuring. My admin permissions, gone. I got a polite message from IT thanking me for my past contributions and requesting I assist Brandon with knowledge transfer. Apparently, I was now legacy knowledge. It hit me somewhere between humiliation and absurdity. They didn't just sideline me. They buried me under a press release, all while calling it alignment. I didn't complain. I didn't start a war. I started collecting notes, timestamps, access logs, trigger chains, not for revenge, not yet, just for accuracy. Because sometimes when a building collapses, you want to know exactly which beam cracked first. I stared at my monitor. Same code base I had lived in for half a decade was now someone else's sandbox. I watched them butcher modules they didn't understand, patch over systems they never built. Every fix was a band-aid over a bomb. And still, I smiled. Because deep down, in a folder buried on a drive no one at Stratavolve had access to, was a simple PDF. A provisional patent filing, filed 2 years ago, under my name. No one else's. I'd built the thing they're selling. Now, I was just an overhead line item. It was a Tuesday night when I met Robert for a drink. Rain slicked the sidewalks outside the little bar on 7th, the kind of place where you order whiskey neat and don't ask for menu. Robert had been my mentor at Stratavolve back when it was 6 people crammed in a shared office that smelled like burnt coffee and whiteboard markers, left 3 years ago when they brought in outside investors who used words like scalable synergy with a straight face. But he still checked in on me like a big brother who'd seen the storm clouds I insisted were just shadows. "You look like hell," he said, sliding a napkin toward me like it could soak up betrayal. "They cut my pay," I said. 30%. He didn't flinch. Just raised one gray eyebrow. "Let me guess. Role redundancy?" I took a sip. "They brought in a loafers and low jack millennial to reimagine the future." Gave him my office, my team. He let out a low whistle, then leaned in. "You still hold the provisional, right?" That stopped me. I hadn't thought about it in months. maybe a year. The flashback came fast, 2 years ago, just after we finished the second major overhaul of Echelon Core's logic framework. I'd gone to Strativolve Legal with a full write-up and flow diagram, requesting we initiate a patent filing. The product was too critical, too unique to leave unprotected. They patted my head metaphorically, said it was cost prohibitive, that our legal team was focused on priority filings tied to funding rounds. Translation: your work isn't flashy enough for a headline. But Robert had been in the room that day. He'd pulled me aside after and said, if they won't do it, you do it. File the provisional yourself. Cover your ass. So I did. Quietly, thoroughly. Paid for it out of pocket. Built the claim around the validator engine, the part of Echelon Core that authenticated all incoming data before it triggered any action. The brainstem. The thing that made it AI instead of just a dumb logic tree. I filed it with my name as the sole inventor, and then I forgot about it, mostly. Back in the bar, I pulled out my phone and logged into the old patent portal. My fingers moved automatically. Username, password, two-factor auth. There it was. Provisional application no. 62/8xxxxx authenticated logic validator for dynamic logistics systems. Status, active. Days remaining, 14 days. I stared at the number until it stopped blinking in my brain. 14 days until it expired, unless I converted it into a full utility patent. 14 days until it disappeared or became a nuclear button in my pocket. Robert was watching me like a hawk in a henhouse. You never told them you filed it, did you? I shook my head slowly. They didn't ask, and they never even read the backup documentation in the commit logs. He grinned, sharp and proud. Then they're selling something that doesn't belong to them. I went home and pulled up every press release, blog post, and investor deck Strativolve had pushed out in the last 6 months. Echelon Core was everywhere. Headlines like Strativolve's Core AI platform set to disrupt global logistics and Echelon Core, the crown jewel of the Strativolve acquisition deal. In one investor Q&A, Chase himself called it our proprietary logic platform, completely in-house, irreplaceable, and fully owned. My laugh came out dry. He was building his empire on a foundation someone else owned. Someone he'd called redundant. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up reading the patent again, line by line. Clause 9F stared back at me like an old friend. The licensing clause, the one that said any termination or demotion of the sole inventor without cause would trigger an automatic revocation of all downstream licenses. It was standard boilerplate in academia, but no one in corporate ever reads the boilerplate. By morning, the sting of humiliation had dissolved into something colder, sharper. Not rage, not even revenge, just clarity, like a lens finally snapping into focus. I opened a fresh document and began listing systems, which modules called the validator, which ones relied on it, which processes would fail without it. No drama, just math, a logic map of what would break and when. Echelon Core wasn't a product, it was a living system, and they had cut out its heart, and now they had 14 days to realize it. By Thursday morning, my badge beeped red at the server room door. I tried again, beep, red, one more time like maybe the laws of physics were in the mood for a second chance. I stood there holding a lukewarm coffee and a thick binder of test protocols, staring at the sensor like it might offer an apology. It didn't. It just blinked dumbly, mechanical and indifferent, like the people who had made the decision. 5 minutes later, I got the email. Subject, team reassignment, final QA support body. Amanda, in light of operational restructuring, we're reallocating QA responsibilities to align with new leadership workflows. Your involvement is no longer required for Phase Roman 3 validation. Please coordinate with Brandon Hale for knowledge transition. DevOps MGMT. I stared at it for a while, reading between the lines. You're out. Guy who thinks JSON is a TikTok filter is in. I walked back to my desk, which had been moved to the far end of the floor near the copy machine. They'd stripped my name off the whiteboard outside my old office, replaced it with Brandon H. in dry erase marker so faint it looked like an afterthought. Brandon had swaggered in that morning like he'd invented Wi-Fi. Loud, caffeinated, wearing a hoodie that said #TechGod, was holding a protein shake and bragging to the intern about his thought leadership in asynchronous data. When I passed him on the way to the break room, he smirked and said, "Hey there, legacy knowledge. Appreciate your groundwork. Legacy knowledge," like I was a dusty manual someone found under a server rack. I didn't reply. I just smiled, the kind of smile that belongs in a morgue. Inside, I was fire. Later that day, my inbox exploded with notification pings. My GitHub access had been downgraded from owner to contributor, then from contributor to observer. Then finally, my email was moved out of the engineering group altogether and placed under general staff. General staff. 16 years, architected the codebase, designed the validator logic that authenticated every decision the AI made, built the diagnostic tree they still didn't understand. And now I was lumped in with the people who ordered office supplies. I clicked through the changes one by one and documented every timestamp, every revoked permission, every adjusted role flag, every single system trigger that moved me closer to digital non-existence. It wasn't bitterness, not anymore. Bitterness implies you still want the meal you weren't served. I was past that. What I wanted now was accuracy, receipts, proof that when the machine failed, it wasn't because of sabotage. It was because they had systematically amputated the only person who knew where the arteries were. So I started my own log. A personal kill sheet. March 7th, 10:17 a.m. Removed from QA sprint board, March 7th, 10:41 a.m. Deployment server access denied, March 7th, 2:11 p.m. DevOps channel restricted, March 7th, 4:52 p.m. Brandon updates sprint naming convention to Brandon Core, March 7th, 5:33 p.m. Email rerouted to general staff admin. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I just opened a spreadsheet, typed, and sipped my coffee like I was logging bird sightings. By Friday, I wasn't invited to the strategy syncs anymore. The Echelon Core roadmap had been duplicated in a new direction folder when I couldn't access. But I saw the artifacts, broken formatting, missing logic trees, hatch notes that sounded like poetry written by a drunk AI. They were rewriting history in real time, and no one noticed because it came with emojis and bullet points. And Brandon was thriving. He held a lunch and learn titled How to Modernize Legacy Code Without Starting from Scratch. They served donuts. People clapped. I watched from the doorway like a ghost at my own funeral, but I wasn't done. Not even close. I began backing up my own local files. Not the code, they had already yanked my keys for that, but the architecture notes, the diagrams, the validator chains. I recorded every instance of module dependency, every subroutine that would break if the core logic ever got corrupted. I wrote it all down, not because I planned to stop them, but because I wanted to watch. Because when Echelon Core failed, and it would, I didn't want there to be any confusion about why. I smiled at Brandon the next time I saw him. He grinned back, smug and confident. Still hanging around, he asked, sipping his shake. Just observing, I said, and oh, I was, seething, focused, waiting. The meeting with Lindsay happened in a corner booth at an overpriced bakery masquerading as a cafe, where the lattes cost $9 and came with motivational foam art. I hadn't seen her in person since the provisional filing, but she looked the same. Black blazer, blue glasses, and the steady gaze of someone who didn't blink when CEOs bluffed. She slid the file across the table without a word. No small talk, just the truth, neatly stapled and waiting. Clause 9F was on page 6. I didn't need to reread it, but I did. Slowly. In the event the inventor is terminated or reassigned without cause, all licensing rights revert to the named inventor within 72 hours. Use of the protected logic thereafter shall constitute unauthorized commercial exploitation and is subject to injunctive relief and statutory damages under 35 U.S.C. Section 284. We'd used academic boilerplate, the kind of clause that tenured researchers include when universities try to profit off their ideas without giving credit. I remembered thinking at the time, this is overkill. It's just insurance. But now, it was a steel trap in legalese. I looked up. You're sure it holds? Lindsay didn't blink. It was never contested, never signed over. You paid for the filing yourself. The validator logic was yours before Stratovolve even knew what it did. If they demoted you without cause, which they did, it's triggered. They've got no leg to stand on. I nodded once. No smile, no triumph, just a clock ticking in my head. How long until full expiration? I asked. 14 days total. Once you trigger 9F, they have 72 hours to either settle or stop use. If they don't even realize it's triggered, they won't, I said. Not yet. She took a sip of her espresso and raised one brow. What's your end game, Amanda? I didn't answer, because it wasn't revenge, not exactly. I wasn't here to torch the building. I just wanted my name back. my work, my damn dignity. But if that meant watching Chase Ellison's $300 million acquisition swirl down the drain because he treated my career like a line item in a spreadsheet, so be it. I left the cafe and walked back to my car with the folder in hand. The sky was that strange gray where you don't know if it's about to rain or just disappoint you. I drove home in silence, the kind where every bump in the road feels like punctuation. That night, opened my laptop and pulled up the Echelon Core deployment logs. They were still a mess, rushed commits, broken branches, rollback flags everywhere. Brandon had pushed an update titled eCore Final V2 with no version tags. I nearly laughed. 3 days. That's what was left before the live demo with the European buyer. They were flying in executives, lawyers, integration engineers. The system would be tested live, in real time, under load. And it would pass if the validator trusted the chain. But the validator didn't trust Brandon. It trusted the architecture it was built on. Mine. I opened the patent portal again. There it was, waiting like a coiled serpent. All I had to do was log in, flip a switch, and formally revoke licensing under 9F. The moment I did, Echelon Core's backbone would legally evaporate. Any deployment using the logic past that point would constitute IP theft. Not a gray area, not up for debate, theft. They wouldn't notice immediately. That was the best part. The validator would continue working for a little while, until it checked for license integrity again, until it pinged the external chain of custody record and the response came back null. I wrote a post-it note and stuck it to my monitor, trigger at D3. It was simple, cold, unmistakable. By the time I closed the laptop, I wasn't Amanda Rowe, legacy knowledge, or non-essential staff. It was the architect, the trigger, the one they'd erased from the slide deck, but not from the system. And as of now, the countdown had begun. The office was buzzing like a casino floor on rigged electricity. Biggest deal in company history, someone whispered near the espresso machine. €300 million, Euro buyer, locking it down Friday. Brandon strutted past my desk, excuse me, my temporary workstation next to the IT closet, wearing a tailored blazer he absolutely did not understand. Huge week, Amanda, he said, patting my chair like I was a Labrador. Glad you're still part of the journey. I stared at him, deadpan, until he retreated into a conference room where I used to host system design meetings. Now it was leadership strategy sync Echelon Core finalization. Finalization. That word had bite, like they'd solved a puzzle that still had missing pieces. At 10:44 a.m., email hit my inbox. Subject line, party popper you're invited, Echelon Core celebration lunch. Body copy full of exclamation points, balloons, and a photo of Brandon high-fiving the VP of sales like they'd cured cancer. We're thrilled to invite all staff to join us in celebrating the completion of Echelon Core's European deal this Friday. Let's honor the amazing team that made it happen. My name, of course, was not mentioned. Neither was the word architect. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a VPN tunnel, logged into a machine they didn't know I still had SSH access to, a little leftover dev box used for load testing, forgotten but still very much alive, and then I navigated to the patent portal. The legacy one, the one with the bad UI and the long load times, the one that still mattered. It asked me to confirm my credentials. It asked me to confirm revocation. It asked me, one last time, are you sure you want to disable provisional licensing access for application 62/8xxxxx? I hovered over the button for a long moment, not out of doubt, but out of reverence. This wasn't a strike. It was a key turning in a lock, quiet, surgical. I clicked confirm. There was no explosion, no alert, no blinking lights. But deep in the back end, something changed. The validator chain had a silent failsafe, designed for license compliance checks. A small heartbeat packet sent every 72 hours to verify the integrity of the licensing chain. The next time it pulsed, Friday morning, 6:00 a.m., the system would expect a response from the provisional licensing registry. It would receive none. And that heartbeat, it wasn't just symbolic. If the validator didn't receive license confirmation, would do what it was designed to do, refuse to validate any logic tree execution. Without validation, Echelon Core couldn't process a single logistics command. And without that, it was just a $300 million box of fancy math and broken dreams. Back in the office, the Slack channels were full of champagne gifts. One engineer wrote, just uploaded the final build. All green, Brandon Core, FTW. I watched him struggle with a routine deployment, asking another dev how to reset a CI pipeline they'd already deprecated last quarter. I minimized Slack and opened a local log file. It was clean, no alerts, no errors, not yet. That's what made it beautiful. The bomb wasn't wired to the walls. It was wired to time. They wouldn't even notice it ticking. I took a walk around the building that afternoon. The interns were giggling near the HR booth. Someone had brought cupcakes. There was a whiteboard where people were writing what Echelon Core means to me. I wrote nothing. I left quietly, walked past the glass door with my reflection in it, and felt nothing but precision. That night, I ate dinner alone, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for no reason at all, and wrote a single sentence in my personal notebook: validator chain no longer trusted, awaiting next pulse. She smiled. It wasn't joy. It was precision. A-2 began like a whisper you can't quite place. Not loud, just off. It started with a hallway conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. Two project managers hovered near the kitchenette, sipping oat milk lattes and scrolling on their phones. One muttered, "Weird Amanda's name isn't on the deck." She basically birthed Echelon Core. The other shrugged. Brandon probably restructured it. Marketing wants a cleaner story for the buyers. Cleaner story. That phrase hit like static in my skull. I didn't turn around. Just walked right past them, coffee in hand, heart not even bothering to race. This wasn't shock. This was math. I already knew I was being erased, now they were just doing it publicly. By lunch, it had spread. I heard a junior dev whisper to someone in the break room who wrote the validator again. Like the actual engine, the answer came from someone high up, CTO himself, if my ears were right. Behind the glass door of the conference room, I heard him say, casual as a shrug, validator, that was. Some legacy team years ago. Amanda maybe, or someone she worked with, legacy team. 16 years boiled down to a shrug and a question mark. I sat back at my desk, opened my laptop, and began the quietest self-erasure you've ever seen. First, I opened my personal archive. Every diagram, every sketch, every logic tree I'd built when no one else knew what Echelon Core even was. I deleted them, locally, securely, with no trace. Then I logged into the shared folder marked Old Architecture Docs, ref only, and removed my name from the last few editable comments. Then I removed myself from the folder permissions entirely. Next, I combed through the private Slack messages I'd kept with junior engineers over the years, troubleshooting advice, performance hacks, custom queries I'd written just for them. I deleted everyone, not out of spite, out of necessity. They didn't want the person, just the shell, so I was giving them exactly that. No notes, no roadmap, no trace. I opened up our internal knowledge base and found my user page, Amanda Rowe, Senior Systems Architect. I requested a role title update, no longer applicable. Please deactivate. I didn't wait for approval. I just removed my profile photo, wiped the description, and let the placeholder icon do the talking. Numb resolve. That's what it felt like. Not rage, not heartbreak, just the stillness of someone carefully folding a flag at the end of a war. In the background, the acquisition circus played on. Brandon scheduled a final deck polishing session in a private meeting room. Someone printed a vinyl banner that said, "Welcome, European partners." The Stratovolve logo blown up like a Fortune 500 love letter. The boardroom windows were being wiped by a cleaning crew, floors polished, catering confirmed. They were preparing for coronation. I was preparing for impact. At 4:23 p.m., I opened LinkedIn. I stared at my title for a long moment. Senior Systems Architect Stratovolve Systems. Backspaced the whole thing. Typed in something new, something they'd never take from me, no matter how many decks they rewrote. Patent holder, Echelon Core Logic Engine Trademark Independent Consultant, no company tag. No logo, no apology. Just truth. I clicked Save Changes. The page refreshed. The title stuck. Almost immediately, I got a connection request from someone at the buyer's firm. Didn't accept it. Not yet. The system would pulse soon. The heartbeat would fail. They'd know soon enough. I shut my laptop, deleted my Slack app, sat in silence. Not because I was broken, but because I was done. It started with a hiccup. The dry run demo was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. sharp. European buyers dialing in from Munich, suits prepped and caffeinated, marketing slides polished to a synthetic glow. Brandon was standing at the front of the boardroom like a motivational speaker, arms spread wide, talking about synergy and scalable intelligence. Every time he said the word Echelon Core, imagined him trying to describe electricity to a caveman. But the screen didn't cooperate. The interface loaded barely, but the backend didn't respond. No data, no confirmation, no triggers, just a loading icon spinning like a drunk ballerina. The CTO shifted in his seat. Someone whispered, "Is this the staging server?" Brandon clicked again. Nothing. He forced a laugh. "Looks like we've got a small sync delay. Probably cached tokens." No one responded. Tried to reboot the module. Then again. Then one of the tech leads in the back said it quietly, like he was afraid the walls might hear. "We've lost validator trust." The room went still. The European lead on the call leaned into the webcam. "What does that mean?" The junior engineer glanced nervously at Brandon, then said it anyway. "It means the system doesn't believe it has permission to run. The core logic isn't validating. It's deadlocked. Deadlocked. Word you never want to hear in logistics, or anywhere, really." Brandon's face turned the color of a microwave tomato. "Get Amanda in here," he snapped. Now. Phones came out, Slack messages fired, emails sent, and Amanda was 30,000 feet over the Atlantic on a flight to Lisbon. Middle seat, cheap airline, no Wi-Fi, no signal. Her phone was powered off and shoved in the seatback pocket, next to a bag of peanuts and a paperback she wasn't even reading. She stared out the window, not smiling, not smirking, just still, detached peace. She knew they'd hit the wall. She knew exactly when the validator would check for license integrity. 6:00 a.m. The system would make a polite little query to the provisional registry. It would get silence, and like a well-behaved watchdog, it would sit down and refuse to move. By 6:02, server logs would start throwing errors. By 6:05, fallback scripts would kick in, but those depended on the same validator. By 6:07, support would realize they couldn't override it. By 6:09, someone would panic. By 6:10, they'd realize Amanda wasn't in the building. Back in the boardroom, Chase Ellison had gone from smug to snarling. His tie was loose, sweat creeping through his collar. "Why didn't anyone flag this earlier?" he barked. Someone mumbled, "Thought the validator was legacy." Brandon said we didn't need to check it. Brandon opened his mouth, closed it, then tried to redirect. "It's probably just a misconfiguration. Someone called DevOps already tried. They're locked out too." The buyer's lawyer spoke up. "You assured us this system was proprietary, fully deployable. You're saying the core is non-functional?" Brandon nodded like his neck was about to snap off. "It's a temporary licensing artifact. We'll resolve it. By tomorrow, silence." The call ended 20 minutes later with thin smiles and murmured promises. The Europeans didn't hang up angry. They hung up, watching. The worst kind of silence. The kind that meant their lawyers were already running their own diagnostics. Back on the flight, Amanda closed her eyes. Listened to the hum of the engines. The peace she felt wasn't gloating. It wasn't vengeance. It was just the calm that comes when the last domino tips, and you no longer have to hold it. She'd warned them in 100 ways, through meetings, memos, architecture maps, and quiet commitment. But they'd chosen noise over signal, hype over function. And now, the system they loved was showing them what happened when you cut out the heart and called it progress. There was nothing left for her to do. The validator was silent. The trust was revoked. And Amanda Rowe was unreachable. By 8:17 a.m., the legal floor at Stratovolve was in full cardiac arrest. The CTO's assistant had sprinted down with a printed screenshot, an error message from the validator stack that simply read, "License trust chain invalid ruth required." The phrase didn't sound threatening, not to the untrained ear, but to the legal team, it was a loaded gun pointed straight at the deal. By 8:23, 2 in-house counsels had begun frantically digging through the IP portfolio, combing patent numbers, license documents, and code ownership filings like they were searching for a lost will before the reading. And that's when they found it. Buried in a 6-line entry under external intellectual property, not company, owned sat the digital tombstone of Stratovolve's future. Provisional patent 62/8XX, XXX authenticated logic validator for dynamic logistics systems. Owner, Amanda Rowe. Filed independently. Licensing active through Clause 9F. For a moment, the entire room fell into a stunned, fluorescent-lit silence. Then someone whispered, "Clause 9F, what is that?" A junior legal analyst, eyes wide, voice dry, read it aloud from Amanda's scanned filing. In the event of involuntary termination, demotion, role reassignment of the inventor without cause, any granted license for use of the protected logic is immediately void. All derivative works are legally unlicensed and subject to litigation. And that was it. The floor dropped out of the deal. At 8:41 a.m., the buyer's legal team, already suspicious after the failed demo, received the scanned clause in a just so you're aware email from someone in the building who still had a conscience, maybe just a LinkedIn account. The reply came fast. Subject: Stratovolve acquisition pause. We are halting all deal progress immediately. A full audit of validator ownership is being conducted. Do not represent Echelon Core as proprietary until resolved. Pending legal confirmation, consider your position in material breach of our term sheet. Chase got the message while standing in front of a whiteboard drawing a frantic rescue plan with Brandon. He read it, turned white, then red, then still. The board was called into an emergency meeting by 9:10 a.m. No slides, just paper. The CFO read the clause out loud to the full table. One of the investors stood up halfway through and muttered, "You didn't check the patent chain? Are you out of your F?" Chase raised both palms. It was provisional. Nobody files those solo. She was staff. The lawyer didn't flinch. She paid for it herself, filed under her name, never signed over ownership. We ignored the clause because no one thought it would ever trigger. Someone else asked the question, now eating through the room like acid. Can we fix this? The answer wasn't spoken. It didn't have to be. Across the world, the validator chain had already broken. The provisional license was gone. The logic validator that powered Echelon Core no longer legally belonged to Stratovolve. And without that validator, the entire product was legally, functionally DOA. They couldn't spin it. They couldn't fake it. They couldn't even run the system without tripping a dozen violations of US IP law. Amanda's clause hadn't just cut the power, it had burned the deed. At 9:28 a.m., she received the first email. Subject: Urgent, please call ASAP body. Amanda, we need to speak immediately. There's been a misunderstanding. Please, just 5 minutes of your time. She stared at it for a moment and swiped it away. At 9:36, a second email came. Subject: Amanda from Chase Body. This is above me now. I understand you're upset, but we can work this out. Whatever you want, we're listening. Please reach out before the board escalates this further. She didn't open it. By 10:04, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She powered it off. She was sitting on a balcony in Lisbon, coffee in hand, sunlight warming her face, Atlantic glimmering just beyond the rooftops. Her inbox had 10 new messages. 2 were from investors. 1 was from the buyer's firm, the rest, Stratovolve. She took another sip of coffee. Let the phone stay off. Watched the sea move. The system was silent. The clause had triggered. And Amanda Rowe wasn't calling back. The emergency board meeting kicked off at 10:42 a.m. and devolved into absolute chaos by 10:48. Partner from the buyer's firm dialed in, stone-faced, flanked by 2 lawyers, and a translator who didn't need to translate anything. The word breach is multilingual. Chase tried to salvage the call with a half-baked monologue about miscommunication, good faith negotiations, and resolving internal inconsistencies. But the buyer wasn't interested in theater. He held up a printed copy of the provisional patent, Amanda's name highlighted, circled, underlined. He spoke slowly. Your core product is not yours to sell. Silence. Then came the worst sentence a CEO can hear in a live acquisition call. We're walking away. Brandon Hale, still clinging to a keyboard like it could save his career, interjected. There's gotta be a workaround. We can rewrite the validator. I mean, it's just logic. The European lawyer raised one eyebrow. Your validator was logic. Now it's a lawsuit. Brandon tried to argue. I had to say something about modular architecture and redundancy. But his voice cracked. He started crying quietly, snot running down onto his #TechGod hoodie. No one handed him a tissue. At 11:16 a.m., the buyer disconnected. The call screen went black. Someone in the room exhaled like they'd been holding their breath for an hour. The Stratovolve board was still frozen, jaws clenched, fingers twitching near conference phones like they were landmines. CFO, gray-faced, drenched in flop sweat, flipped through the due diligence binder like it might still save him. Then flatly, he read from page 44. The logic engine is not legally ours. You could hear it echo. The words landed like a guillotine. Chase Ellison sat back, no words left. His $3,000 watch caught the light as he rubbed his temples. The head of HR quietly collected his contract. Not fired, not yet, but reviewed, which, in their world, was a slower kind of death. Outside the boardroom, someone started erasing the Welcome European Partners banner from the lobby whiteboard. Halfway through the word European, they gave up and walked away. That afternoon, the story hit the press. Former staffer's IP tanked Stratovolve's $300M deal system, built on revoked license. Article included a side-by-side image of Amanda's original filing and a timestamped quote from the buyer's rep. Due diligence revealed the core product was never legally transferred. Reddit exploded. Twitter turned it into a meme. Amanda Rowe in sunglasses, holding a cup of coffee, with the caption "Not a bug." A clause. At 2:11 p.m. Lisbon time, Amanda sat in a quiet corner of a co-working space, nestled in an old building near the waterfront. Laptop was open. A tab with the article sat next to an empty inbox folder she'd just cleaned out. New emails were rolling in fast. One from a supply chain company in Seattle, another from a legal tech startup in Berlin. 3 with subject lines that just read, "Consulting Inquiry," but one stood out. Subject, "Open to consulting, NDA attached. No begging, no apology, just a door." Amanda sipped her espresso, the same kind she'd ordered every day that week. Smooth, strong, undramatic, she stared at the subject line, not because it excited her, but because it was hers to open or not. She smiled, not to forgive, but to choose. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.